It's really awesome to see so many folks here. Many of you have been engaged in thinking about this research coordination network for, I think, 4 years, the first unsuccessful attempt at our first COPE grant, and then we wrote a DICES grant, and then we got it funded right at the beginning. We're right in the doldrums of the pandemic, and we managed to recruit and hire Kira O'Donnell, who is coming with an amazing background in sustainability science and social science and a real interest in coastal hazards and coastal community resilience. And she was worth waiting for. So Kira started in June, and we're kicking it off with this first webinar. Amanda Mueller, could you mute? Thank you. We are taking advantage of one of the silver linings of COVID, and that we actually don't have to wait for an in-person meeting to start building interactions. So the goal of these monthly webinars is to build out a community to really hear from folks about how we can best coordinate, work together. I think to just amplify the work that we're all doing already to find synergies that make all of our work have higher impact. So I'm going to spend just a little time giving some background, and apologies for those of you that have been involved all the way through. I just want to make sure we're kind of all on the same page of what we're talking about. I'll share my screen. Everybody see that? Kira, can you give me a thumbs up? Great. So I think probably you've all joined the webinar today because we all share this question that we really want to know the answer to. What will happen to the ecosystems and communities of the Eastern Coastal Plain over the next century? We're thinking about SWISLR, saltwater intrusion, sea level rise. We're thinking about the vulnerability of the systems that we're interested in. We're thinking about the impact of this combination of SWISLR and vulnerability on ecosystems and people. And we're thinking about what the response might be. If people can mute, there's some background noise coming from some folks. The proposal that's funding this work is the DICES RCN, Saltwater Intrusion, Sea Level Rise, and Rural Landscapes, assessing risk and identifying mitigation and adaptation options for rural coastal plain communities. For those that don't know the acronyms, let me just make sure I point out that DICES is a program through the National Science Foundation to study the dynamics of integrated socio-environmental systems. RCN means a research coordinating network. That's what all of you are considering being a part of if you haven't already committed. And SWISLR is a much faster way to say saltwater intrusion and incursion and sea level rise, which is quite a mouthful. So this is the SWISLR RCN with the goal of thinking about integrated socio-environmental systems. So let's just talk a little bit about SWISLR and how we sort of see this here at the outset of the RCN. First part of this is sea level rise, and almost everyone on this call is thinking about sea level rise in some way, shape, or form. We're all probably working on that on one or a few sites up and down the Eastern Coastal Plain or the Gulf Coast. And one of the things that I think we need to think about is how we're actually working in places that have different and variable rates of sea level rise. So if we start thinking about trying to put ourselves on this map, you know, if you're working in different parts of the coastal plain, the speed at which we're seeing sea levels rise can vary quite a lot, has varied a lot in the past, and will vary a lot in the future. The other thing that's probably quite different for us as we work across our different sites is the frequency with which major hurricanes have hit our sites and influenced storm surge and created, you know, massive damage and disturbances to both human and natural communities in ways that are influencing the way they are responding to future change. And then, of course, we've also experienced a different history of trends in the magnitude, duration, severity, frequency of droughts. Both storm surges from hurricanes and droughts are ways in which we're going to get saltwater incursion into surface waters. And then, of course, sea level rise is leading to both incursion and intrusion. And so for some of us, we're talking about a problem that's really a groundwater problem. And for some of us, we're talking about a problem that's much more of a surface water problem. And I think we've put all that in the same umbrella. And I'm really excited about the opportunity to talk to folks and figure out how the places that I work fit into the context of this whole map of places along our coastal fringe that are being affected. So let's talk about vulnerability. I like this, the NOAA Sea Level Rise Viewer, such an amazing tool. This just shows you, this is not future vulnerability, this is areas of the North American coastal plain that are already subject to recurrent or nuisance flooding. And I think, you know, this very simple map shows you there's some bullseyes on here, some places that are really bright red. There's some places where the fringe is really, really tiny. I think this sort of the likelihood of having this nuisance flooding is one indicator of vulnerability. And what controls that variation, a lot of it has to do with the topography of the landscape, but also human infrastructure, both built infrastructure and drainage infrastructure. So if we compare what these risk maps look like for somewhere like Long Island or Ocean City, Maryland, or the Albemarle Pamlico Peninsula, where I've done much of my work, you've got really different patterns, right? And in each case, it's this interaction between climate trends, disturbance trends, and human infrastructure. In our bullseye here on the coast of North Carolina, the big story, which Ben Poulter worked on for his PhD work here at Duke, among many other things, is the incredible intensity of drainage infrastructure. So all these gray lines here, those aren't roads, those are canals. And this creates this really enhanced vulnerability because humans have vastly increased the drainage density of this landscape in order to make it possible to farm it. And that then makes those landscapes more vulnerable to sea level rise and saltwater intrusion because we've just really increased the hydrologic connectivity of the landscape. That's going to be true to varying degrees across the North American coastal plain. Again, something I'm really interested in is how our infrastructure disturbance interactions create really different trajectories of change. And then we can think about vulnerability from the social standpoint as well. If you start looking at these bullseyes of flood hazards and flood risk, they're on the top of this series of panels. We start focusing in on some of these bullseyes, the Gulf Coast of Louisiana, the west coast of southern Florida, the coast of North Carolina. We can see there's a lot of overlap between flood hazards and poverty. And so we're looking at a lot of really vulnerable human communities who are going to be bearing the brunt of a lot of these changes. This paper just came out. I just found it this morning as I was thinking about what to say here in demography. We're thinking about what are people in these landscapes going to do? And here Matt Hauer suggests that two major secular trends will come to a head in this century: demographic change and climate change. This is looking just at coastal counties. As we demonstrate, people of color and the elderly will likely predominate in coastal regions in the future. And at the same time, climate impacts due to intensified warming are expected to worsen as we approach the end of the century. So he and his co-authors are proposing that climate change hazards in coastal regions will likely threaten an increasingly diverse and older coastal U.S. population, potentially amplifying already existing inequalities. So we think about these rural landscapes being vulnerable in terms of their topography, in terms of their infrastructure, and in terms of their variable socioeconomic capital. And then what do we think about impact? Again, I'm an ecosystem scientist, so I've come into this field of study really thinking about what's happening to unmanaged landscapes. And I think lots of people are very familiar with the idea of these eroding edges. These are pictures from the coastal plain of North Carolina, preserve areas where we're seeing all these cypress stumps tens to hundreds of meters out into the sound. We're seeing an eating away at the land itself. But we're also finding massive expansion of ghost forests and loss of forested wetlands well inland. Again, here's a picture from pretty far inland along the Intracoastal Waterway here in North Carolina, where again, this hydrologic infrastructure is allowing saltwater intrusion to penetrate well beyond the coastal margin. So these are issues that, there's been a lot of focus on sea level rise issues and coastal hazards on the fringe, but our research coordinating network really wants to focus on these vast rural landscapes where we're also seeing a lot of rapid change. And of course, one of the consequences of the loss of these unmanaged systems, or this transition of unmanaged systems from forested wetlands to perhaps herbaceous wetlands or marsh, is that you're losing a lot of stored carbon. And that has, of course, really important feedbacks back to climate change. Many folks on this call are interested in agricultural systems. Agriculture is one of the major parts of the economy for many of our coastal counties. And of course, saltwater intrusion doesn't stop at the edges of agricultural fields. I stole a picture from you, Kate Tolle. I'm glad you're here today, from a recent paper that Kate published in some of her work on the Delmarva Peninsula, looking at the intrusion of salt into farm fields. And so we're seeing a loss of yields, declines in yields, and abandonment of farmlands resulting from saltwater intrusion. This picture on the right is sort of your worst case scenario of a salt crust forming on one of the fields where Kate has worked. So I think when we think about what this means for managed lands, the consequences for agriculture are obviously pretty extreme. And then, of course, we think about people. What's going to happen to the people in these landscapes as we change the possibility of earning a livelihood off agricultural lands, or as we think about dealing with a landscape that's changing really rapidly, or frequent disturbances that make it difficult to live in a flooded or damaged home. These are projections, again, with a 1.8 meter sea level rise scenario. We're expecting a lot of migration out of coastal counties as a result or as a response to that damage. So what will the response be? And I think here it's people are going to decide whether we invest in technologies that allow us to resist change, whether we abandon these landscapes, whether we find ways to adapt to climate change, or whether we really transform the way folks live and work in these coastal landscapes. All these decisions are going to be in the hands of individual people to decide and communities to decide. And I think the ecological responses will help shape and then respond to those decisions. So you come back to these questions. One thing that I'm quite excited about with this coordination network is the opportunity to learn from folks working in really different places about what each of these pieces look like for the place you work and for the thing that you study. So as we think about each of these things look differently, whether you're on the coast of South Carolina, the coast of Connecticut, the Louisiana coast, the Florida coast, and whether you're thinking about the human communities or the ecological communities. And I am really hoping that by comparing what we're learning and by coordinating the way we are studying this wicked problem, we can bring a lot of power to actually making positive change. The goal that we wrote in the proposal is that the goal of the RCN is not only to collect and synthesize the current scientific understanding of SWISLR impacts, but to co-develop the future trajectory of scientific research on this topic with community partners to ensure that SWISLR research is providing the knowledge and insights that coastal community leaders need in order to protect the most vulnerable communities. So I think this is a place where we need to put a lot of effort in over the coming year to make connections to the people who really need to be in the room to help us shape the questions that we want to go after with as scholars. These are the 6 questions that we wrote in the proposal, and these are going to orient the webinars that are coming ahead. So Kira's going to set us up so we're sort of focusing on these questions over time. But I'll just read them here, and then I'm going to turn it over to Ji to talk a little bit about some of the work that we're doing to think about maps, ways to sort of create this, this connective tissue between people and questions. So question 1, who's engaged in decisions about climate risk prevention, climate adaptation, and SWISLR mitigation, and who's excluded, basically who's in the room for these conversations? What proportion of the North American coastal plain has recently undergone and is currently vulnerable to significant ecosystem transitions as a result of SWISLR? This idea of actually kind of trying to actually create a comprehensive map of what's already happened. How are water management and climate change interacting to determine the magnitude, extent, and duration of saltwater intrusion within and across the North American coastal plain? This intersection with infrastructure and the challenge of the hydrologic modeling of this problem. Question 4, what are the consequences of SWISLR for farms and coastal fisheries, for the livelihoods that are really important in these rural landscapes? Question 5, how is SWISLR affecting the structure, biodiversity, and function of ecological systems throughout the North American coastal plain? These may not be the places where people live, but they're vitally important to part of the economy and also to the protection of people in these landscapes. And then finally, how are coastal communities interpreting, responding to, and managing for SWISLR impacts and risk? And particularly important, how does that vary through across different states and different traditions? So with that as our intro, I'm going to turn it over to you, Ji, to sort of talk through one of the sort of exciting pieces of work moving forward.
Thanks, Emily. All right, so I'll talk a little bit about all the spatial data sets that we want to synthesize in this RCN. So one of the major goals of this RCN is for us to synthesize what kind of spatial data sets are useful to address this problem and that are available to the community. So these are included, as you can see from the left-hand side of this slide, is that their data sets quantify the temporal dynamics of land cover, the changes in marsh, coast forests, croplands, etc. Also, the hydrological data sets, such as the distribution of human-made or natural-made channels that may bring saltwater inland. In addition, we also need socioeconomic data sets, such as demography and land value, etc., things like that. Some of those data sets are available at the regional scale, while others might be only available at the local scale. And so this RCN, hopefully during our 3-year period, we can integrate all of this information in a central location, a central data hub to make it easy, accessible for everyone, and all people in this community. So one example I want to give of this spatial products is the map created by Elliot White, who was a postdoc working with me and Emily, and now assistant professor at Stanford, who showed that the spatial distribution of coast forest loss is highly variable across the landscape. So we can see that there are hotspots in the coast forest loss, and these are in the Southeast United States. Edit, it is here. Yeah, great. Overall, we lost about 8% of the coast forest dwellings in this region in 20 years, between 1996 and 2016. And you can also check out Eddie's paper published in here in 2021 in Ecosystems for more details. And perhaps, Elliot, if you have more questions, you can ask Elliot about it. Next slide, please. So, yes, cool. So we're entering a new era of remote sensing data sets. So there are a lot of new remote sensing techniques that can provide us new information about and this problem SWISLR. So if you can click on, yes, thank you, Emily. For example, in the past, remote sensing data sets are relatively coarse in resolution, so we cannot differentiate individuals. But now we know that, tree mortality or other kind of coastal-related, soil intrusion-related loss are highly heterogeneous across the landscape. So we need high-resolution satellite images, and which are available to us now to help us to identify individual, for example, here in individual tree mortality that are recorded using high-resolution remote sensing data set. So this is the paper published by my postdoc Atticus Stovall. And this is a different ecosystem. This is in California. We look at the tree mortality in California, but we can apply the same approach on similar type of data sets in our coastal ecosystems. The next one, another example is that we can use remote sensing to map inundation extent. This is the work by Chao Wang and Tamlin Pavlovsky from UNC. And what you're seeing here on the panel A, that shows the SAR, synthetic aperture radar microwave image of a landscape, and the pink color here indicate the inundated forest. And then so you can map all of those from airborne remote sensing image from this instrument called UAV SAR. And from panel C and D, those are from satellite Sentinel-1, also shows that you can even also do this at the satellite scale. So this is a part of our recently NASA-funded project, and we're very excited to carry out this work. And we're also looking for a postdoc to lead the efforts to use higher resolution images to identify individual tree mortalities. So please help us to spread the word if there are interested individuals who are interested in leading this work and working with us. Please ask them to email me. Yeah, so the last one I want to mention is we would like to, if you can click on that.
Sorry.
Yeah, thanks. So in this RCN, what we hope to learn from you is what's on your wish list. What do you hope remote sensing can provide you? What kind of data set you hope remote sensing can provide to you? And yeah, information, that those kind of information will be good for us to know. Yeah, that's all.
Yeah, and then I just wanted to give a little bit of an overview of kind of within the network itself, where we started and where we kind of want to go. So it really started as I first got on with about 80 people and a lot of academics, one landowner, a couple of NGOs, and some state and federal agencies, and looking at who they're working with and what their current collaborations are and what they're currently working on. And so this is a very academic network that we made up, but it is showing that there's a lot of connections already and a lot of connections that we can rely on to share these data that G was talking about and to share information that Emily was talking about. But it is very academic. And so one of the goals that I personally have, and I hope other people have as well, is to grow this network to connect to more people, and not only to connect to academics, but to connect to these landowners and these homeowners and community scholars. And then the next slide. So to start kind of understanding and synthesizing the knowledge of what people have, we were asking what people are currently studying. And so we have a lot of people studying wetlands and ecology and climate change, but another goal of this RCN is to make this team more interdisciplinary, more multidisciplinary, to grow these words. So we have people who understand and can provide input on the social aspects, on biogeochemistry, on the plants that are being impacted by SWISLR. And so in order to grow, we need to make sure that we're understanding the connections that people want to make and then what people want to do. So with the next slide that I also talked to people about, we want to know what you want out of this network. So far, I've only been able to talk with maybe like half of our current research coordination network. And with that, we've seen a lot of people talking about collaboration, some tangible projects and work that can come out of this, synthesizing all of the information that Emily and G were already talking about, but we want to understand more. So to do that, for today, we have a kind of led discussion, and the next slide will kind of show a very wordy document of the instructions, but don't worry, the Jamboard, which is how we will be leading this kind of discussion, it also has the instructions on that first form. So Emily will share the Jamboard link in the comments while I go through what we're kind of asking you all to do.